Hi, my name is Ron Kernebone. I'm the coordinator of the Injured Workers Support Network, and today I'm going to talk about my story. I'm going to give you an example of how you can tell your story, which should help you explain what's happened to you in a way that other people can understand and make it easy for you to remember. My story started well before I was born, when my father worked for a company called ICI at Kurnell in Sydney. At the time, my dad was a manager of a chemical plant there that ICI decided needed to become bigger, so they were going to rip down the old brick chemical plants and build again. Unfortunately, they decided to build in asbestos. If you don't know about asbestos, it's very dangerous. My father went to the board and told them that A, asbestos was dangerous, and B, if they did build again in asbestos, it was likely the chemicals would strip the walls fairly quickly. Well, despite that, and despite Dad going to his union and his union also representing him and his problems, they just didn't accept it. So this was back in the 70s. There wasn't a huge amount of information on it, but there was enough. When they decided that they were going to strip it down and build again, then my dad's problems started. Because you see, the chemicals that they produced in that plant, once it became an asbestos plant, did strip the walls, and stripped the walls fairly quickly, within about 2 to 3 years of them actually building the plants. So they had to strip it down, they had to tear it down. My dad went back to the board and told them that they have to do this safely. If they don't do this safely, the people who were working in the plants and the people who were tearing it down would be at risk from asbestosis. The board didn't listen and they tore it down. My dad has a photo taken from a crane which showed a pillar of smoke, a pillar of asbestos rising up into the air with about 200 workers covered in the stuff. Unfortunately, my father passed away from mesothelioma in 2005. And most of those 200 people who were working there, they've also passed on. So the board didn't listen. My dad did take them to the Dust Diseases Board and got a win. You can look that up online through Osley. Just type in Kernebone and you can see what happened there. But my dad passed away because of a decision a board made. This to me says that no matter what the decision is, anybody in power needs to decide on more than just cost. They need to think about the humans involved. And when someone who is an expert says to them they need to think again and presents evidence that they need to think again, they should. So that's my story. I hope that gives you an example of how to tell your story. It might be more complicated, it might be less complicated. But in total, that presentation was just over 2 minutes. Hopefully you've got everything from it that you need to create your own story. But we'll go into a little bit more depth as well. So we're going to be looking at a purposeful conversation. That's a conversation with someone where you want them to come away with something. It might be a thought, it might be an action, it might be just to make sure that they've heard what you've said. And as you can see that quote there, clothes maketh the man, naked people have little or no influence on society. To me that says you need to prepare. If you want to get something from someone, you need to know what you want to get from them. And that's basically about it for that front page. Let's move on. Surprisingly enough, the first thing we have to do is be there. Without the attempt, there is no success. So before you want someone to do something, you've got to be there to get them to do it, to have that conversation with them. So as we can see, there are 3 people having a conversation together, and there's one person off the side. Obviously he doesn't want to join in the conversation. It might take a bit of guts, it might take a bit of pride to start those conversations, to start being there. But if you want something to change, then you have to be there to help it change, to give the information to the person that you want to change, and give them something else, which we'll come to. So, the first thing we're looking at is where you're going to have the conversation, who you're going to talk to. I like to think of these as stages. As you can see, there's a theatre stage there. People go there to listen to people to talk. Basically what I'm talking about here is who owns the stage, who will allow you to talk and allow you to say what you want to say. There are stages that we own, that we have control over. There's a stage that other people own, that other people have control over. And there are stages which no one seems to own by themselves, that no one has real control over. For example, if you're having a coffee with a couple of friends, then you can basically say what you want to say and ask them what you want to ask, to have that purposeful conversation there and then. That's a stage that you own. If you want to do the same on a talkback radio station, well, you don't really have a lot of control over that. You do make the phone call, but there's a hang up button that the presenter has, and at any stage that presenter can turn you off, or you might not even get through to that presenter. So they own that stage. They have control over who says what on that stage. And there are blog sites, there's Facebook, there's Twitter. It's a stage which no one owns. You've got no real control over who will listen, but at the same time, no one has control over what you will say. And it's the same for everything. So there are your stages. Before you start to talk and before you start to prepare, you've got to think about who's your audience, whose stage you're on. Is it yours? Is it somebody else's? Or is it no one's? I have 2 stories about stages. Stages that no one owns and stages that someone in particular owns. I'll start with that one. Alan Jones has his own radio program. People ring up, it's talkback. I remember quite some time ago an old man rang him up with a particular issue, which to me, although actually I don't remember what he was saying, sounded pretty important, but Alan Jones got a bit flustered, got a bit bored perhaps, it's up to him, I don't know, and cut him off. He cut him off with the question, what do you want? What are you asking? And the old man unfortunately didn't have an answer for it. So he ummed and ahed, and basically that's where it ended. The other one I have is about an ex-Strathfield councillor. I grew up in Strathfield. This ex-councillor stood outside Strathfield Council for years, 15 years, 20 years, wearing a sandwich board with a message on it. You might see him around. He's still active in Sydney. And his basic question was, vote for me, the next one. Vote for me at the next council election. Well, he was voted in. He didn't last very long, but he achieved his aim, all because he stood out the front of Strathfield Council with a sandwich board. Effective, he got what he wanted, didn't last long, but there you go. The thing is preparation, the thing is the ask. So now you've thought about your stage, the next thing you need to realise is that it's your voice and your choice. You decide what to say. Nobody else can decide that for you, even if you've been given a speech to read out. It's your voice, it's your choice. There are 3 rules, though, with this. First one is don't talk about something you don't know about. You're not an avatar for injured workers. You're not an avatar for the workers' compensation system or for the Injured Workers Support Network. You don't need to be in control of that stuff. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to be an expert. You are an expert in your own story, in your own life. But don't talk about something that you don't know about. If somebody asks you a question that you don't know the answer, it's better to say, I don't know the answer to that, than to try and make something up at the time. Which comes to the next thing. Don't lie. You won't be able to remember it. Lies stay in a different part of the brain to our memories. and accessing those odd lies is extremely difficult. But as well as that, you will be caught out, and you have to have that thinking that you will be caught. And when you are caught, no one will believe you. Your whole story, no matter how worthwhile it was, will be completely wasted. So don't lie. Finally, share only what you want to hear back from someone else. That means someone you don't know coming back to you and telling you what you've told the other person, the person you were talking to. Confidentiality rests with you. It doesn't rest with the other person. If you have a story which means a lot to you that you don't want spread around everywhere, then maybe you don't tell that person what that is. You don't tell the person. But maybe you do have a story that you're happy to have other people come and talk to you about. Those are things that you need to decide for yourself. No one can decide that for you. You have to decide what you say with your voice by yourself. And finally, in the setup, once you have your stage, what you do with it is up to you. You decide what to say, you decide how to act, you decide the question to put at the end to people. What I will say though, is know your story. Know who you are telling it to, and prepare. So we'll be looking at how to prepare, looking at a template for how to tell your story in under 2 minutes. There you go, a purposeful conversation. One in which you want something out of the person. And there are 3 types of things that you could want in general, and we'll be discussing those pretty soon. But before I go any further, I thought I might share something with you again, and that is the structure of any story. Looks like this. Has a beginning, has an end, and works its way through. This is what we know about because we see movies, we read books, we watch television series, we watch programs. They all start at the beginning and have an end. They flow forward in time. Let me show you something else. Most people, when they have a conversation, go something like this. They start at the beginning, move forward in time to the end, and they flow through it. Pretty simple. This is what it looks like if you're an injured worker. You tell your story to about 8 people, one after the other. Each one has a different conversation with you, asks different questions. The next time you talk about your story, you remember those questions. But you don't remember them as flowing in time. So you double back. You start here, you move on to the future, then double back and keep going like that. So we're going to teach you a way, because you're having a purposeful conversation, of getting it back to there. So now we're going to talk about telling your story. Preparation is key. You know your story, you are the expert in what happened to you, nobody else is. But you have to be prepared to prepare. When you've prepared, you'll know what to say. And when you get asked a question, you'll know how to answer it. Again, not every question you'll be asked will you know the answer to. And we know, don't be an expert. But let's start at a strange place. We're starting with the end. If you don't know what you want them to think, how can you tell them what to think? This is a friend of mine who has the gift of the gab, can talk for yonks, ages. Here, he's asking people to vote. And although he could have a very long conversation about why they should vote, in the way that he wants them to vote, all he's doing is to the passers-by, he's giving them a bit of a pamphlet and saying, vote 1, X. And that's all he's doing. He starts at the end of the conversation. If he had that conversation, his last thing he'd say is vote for X. He's starting with the end. So the end is really the ask. Why bother talking in the first place if you're not going to ask someone to do something? It's known, it's explainable, and it can be followed up. It's known, it's tangible. You can hold on to it if you like, you can think about it, you can repeat it. It's easy to hold on to. A good ask that we all know about is the stop signs on the road. It's asking you to stop, it's telling you to stop. It's explainable. People know that the stop signs are about stopping. We go to school, we learn about these things, about stop signs, and it can be followed up. You can see people stopping. So an example of this would be, please come to the meeting. It's known, you've told them about the meeting, it's been part of your purposeful conversation. They know the meeting's happening, they know when it's happening, they know where it's happening. You're able to explain it. So please come to the meeting is pretty simple. Not all of those will be as simple as that, and can be followed up with. You can actually ask the person, have them come to the meeting, or if you're going yourself, you can see them. So it's been able to be proven. You can prove that the person has listened to you, you can prove that the person has heard you, and you can prove the person has followed up in the way that you want them to be followed up. Okay. So the ask is the question at the end, the last thing you leave them with. And that's a purposeful conversation. It's really important that you get the ask right. It's not always easy to do, but there are 3 things that you need to learn about the ask. One is there's a positive, there's a negative, and there's a neutral ask. Let's look at those now. So the first one's a positive ask. There's a picture of my dog asking me to throw a ball, to do something, to take an action. Come to a meeting is a positive ask. Hand out a flyer is a positive ask. Listen to a story is a positive ask. A positive ask asks somebody to take an action. A negative ask is asking somebody to stop doing something. In this photo, there's a bit of a rally going on, and this guy is asking people to stop driving past or through the rally and to turn around. A negative ask could also be asking someone to stop treating you badly. It could be to stop a law. It could be a lot of things, but it's asking people to stop doing something that they are already doing. A neutral ask is asking somebody to think about it, to not take any action in particular, but to ponder what you've been saying. The little speech I gave at the beginning, my ask was for businesses to think about something other than the costs, to think about what the impact is on people. That would be a neutral ask. I'm not asking them to stop building, I'm not asking them to start building. I'm asking them to think about it. So that's a neutral ask. A lot of the asks that we do give will be neutral asks. Just to sit there, sit back, have a cup of coffee, and think about it. So there you go. In any story, we begin with the end. The end is the ask, the last question, the thing we want people to do. So I'm going to ask you something now. That is to pause, get a piece of paper, and write down what your question will be. Whether it be a positive question, asking somebody to do something, like come to a meeting, a neutral question, asking somebody to think about what you've said, or a negative question, to ask someone to change the laws, to stop the process. Have a think about it. Was I successful? Did my ask result in you taking an action? Have you got your question? Getting an ask is sometimes difficult. In fact, it is difficult. I've always thought about an ask as one of those statements that you write down which you're not too sure about whether you should be putting a question mark on or a full stop. That might help, but it is hard to do. Let's get on with talking about the larger structure, not just the ending. All stories have a beginning, they have a middle, they have an end. Before you start telling it, you have to prepare it. You've got to know what you want to say, you've got to know your ask, got to know your question. Make sure it moves forward in time, that one event follows the other, from your beginning, through to your middle, through to the end. Make it quick. 2 minutes average, 6 minutes is, well, it's too long. The average person can hold somebody else's attention fully for 2 minutes. After 6 minutes, they lose it. And remember, it's your story, but it's a telly's headline. While you're preparing it, you've got to think about how others will hear it and what you want them to hear, even those people who you haven't said it to that might hear it from a second source. So, the personal story structure. The beginning is setting the scene. The middle is telling the story, and the end is giving the ask. We've talked about the ask. You always prepare your ask before you do anything else. We'll talk about the beginning and the middle, and we'll talk a bit further about the end as well, at the end. The beginning is the easiest thing. It's 3 sentences, 3 questions you need to ask. It's kind of like when you first see a sci-fi movie, they show a picture of the city or a picture of a new landscape, a science fiction landscape. You know where you are. Then you meet the heroes, people involved. So, who is involved? where did it take place, and what was the date? Those 3 questions you need to answer. Shouldn't be longer than 3 sentences. So the beginning of my story was 3 sentences. Who was involved? Well, my father and myself. Where did it take place? ICI near Kurnell in Sydney. And what was the day? Before I was born. My father, me, Kurnell, before I was born. That's my beginning. Okay, welcome to complexity, the middle. This is where your story goes. You can say whatever you want, take as long as you want to take it, but remember, it's got to be less than 2 minutes to keep people's attention. The middle is complex because it has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. Those bits that we'd consider the normal storyline, those bits when a normal conversation, if you're a normal human being giving a story, you tend to weave in and out of all these bits. We're going to structure it. We're going to give it a beginning, we're going to give it a middle, and we're going to give the middle its own end. The beginning and the middle. Like the actual beginning of the story, this should be as short as is necessary. It doesn't need to be 3 sentences long. It can be longer, can be shorter. It introduces the facts about how you were injured or what event led you to being in that situation. In my story, in my dad's story, I talked about the fact that the ICI board had decided to build his chemical plant again in asbestos. That sort of led to the rest of the story. That was my beginning. Introduced the facts. My dad was a chemical engineer. My dad was in a chemical plant. The board decided to tear it down and build again as asbestos. That's the beginning and the middle. Now the middle of the middle is where you spend most of your time. It's where the story goes into detail. It's what happened to you after the beginning. Everyone knows the players. Now they want to know the story. There's no limits on this length, but it needs to follow the general rule for the story, which is 2 minutes, no longer than 6 minutes. It moves forward in time. It starts from where you introduce the players, those people involved, to the end, so just before you get to the ask. In my dad's example, I talked about the board decision, I talked about my dad going to the board, I talked about how they removed the asbestos and the photo that my dad took. In general, 3 examples only, mostly because people think in 3 is better than they think in 4s or 5s. So if you can do that, then good on you. But spend some time here, write it down, no limitations on the time at all, and have some fun with this. The end of the middle. In truth, it doesn't need to be the resolution of the story. It's not like a storybook. Your life continues. The end can be where you are up to now and what the future looks like for you. In general, this is short, but doesn't always have to be, and just remember the time rules. So the end of the middle is what most people think of as the end of a novel, the end of a movie. Sometimes it gives you a glimpse into what life would be like afterwards. If you know the Harry Potter books, it's a bit like that. It doesn't have to be a full resolution, but it is the end of your story. It's not the end of your purposeful conversation, though. So that's the middle. The middle has a beginning, the middle has a middle, the middle has an end. It's slightly complicated, but this is where most people think of the story being. Because we're having a purposeful conversation, it doesn't finish there. It doesn't end there. We've still got to do the ask. We've still got to ask them to do something, to not do something, or to stop doing something, or to think about what the story holds. So let's look again at that, and let's really discuss the ending. And now we have it, the end. As I said, I like to think of it as deciding whether something will be a statement or a question. What the end is, what the ask is not, is it's not a question, not entirely. It's not who, what, when, where, why, or how. It's a statement which asks people to do something. Please stop at the lights. Well, that's a question, really. But it's also a full stop. But it's not who stops at the light. What happened before the stop stops? When did this occur? Where do you stop at the lights? Why didn't you stop at the lights? Or how the hell should we stop at the lights? It's a statement. It's an ask. And that's what we're after. Hope you enjoy. So, I hope that was useful. I hope it's given you some thinking and some acting and a way to describe what's happened to you to other people in a manner that's going to be purposeful, in a manner that will get you what you want. And maybe it's just for them to think about it, maybe it's for them to do something about it, maybe it's for them to stop doing something about it. Anyway, anytime, come back, have another listen, have another read. Ring us up, ask us some questions. Prepare, and always be ready to have a purposeful conversation. Have a good day.